Namaste, Assalamu alaikum, Shalom. Ni hao, buenos dias, buenos tardes, Seseche, Aquaba, Velkomen, what up, though? This is Café Mélanger, week número 9, session 4, story day. So today we're looking at the story that is shared by the editor of this joint, Chandra Prasad. And the story is actually a little bit longer than the story by Mamle Kabu. And I have yet to read it, or at least read it within the past few years. So, uncertain what it's about. I read the back of it, the postlude or whatever, and it says there's some violence in this joint, perhaps. So, I try to vet these stories before I share it directly, but we're rolling with this. So I'll read the intro, which says this: Chandra Prasad. Chandra Prasad is a mix of Italian, English, Swedish, and Indian. Her novel, One of the Boys, about a girl who poses as a male student at Yale University in the 1930s, will be published in 2007. 2007. She's the author of the book Death of a Circus and the careers guide Outwitting the Job Market, as well as numerous articles on diversity and the workplace, which have been published in the Wall Street Journal, India Abroad, India, New England, Vault.com, and IamDiversity.com, amongst others. This one is entitled Wayward. The scents bring us back. That's what Mr. Agrawal says. He says the scents of summer are the most potent, the most enduring. The soleil beats hard in Duxton, Massachusetts in late July. It shrivels soft things, flower petals, the worms that struggle up through the ground after a midday shower. The soleil here cares nothing for exteriors. It is interested only in essences, the soft middles. Mr. Agrawal doesn't bother to pick up the ripening tomatoes in the garden, infested with rangy weeds and fat, iridescent beetles. He says he likes the smell of the flesh once the heat has sizzled the peel. It's dusk, and Mr. Agrawal and I laze on the porch. He's breathing slowly, enjoying wafts of wild mint carried by a breeze. Sunk in a dirty plastic lawn chair, eyes closed, he tells me wild mint is his favorite of all summer scents. Breathe it in, Jai. It soothes a weary spirit. I'm not sure if he means weary or wary, but I don't ask, and in either case I don't agree with him. The heat of the day has baked the mint sprigs that spangle the edge of the bog nearby. For hours the aroma has struck me as heady, overwhelming, not so different from the smell at the back of the parking lot behind my school. Mr. Agrawal opens his eyes. They roll slowly down my torn t-shirt and jeans. Your Moore would kill me if she saw the way you dress. I dress like this at home. Like a vagabond? No, like a bee queen. Bee being an abbreviation for the actual word here. A bee beauty queen. I told you not to swear, he snaps. Technically, bee isn't a swear, but I keep my mouth shut. Although he's lived in America since he was 10, Mr. Agrawal opportunistically champions certain Indian traditions, like how arranged marriages are preferable to love marriages, and how youngsters should hush up when their elders speak. Mr. Agrawal turns his attention to the newspaper I'm trying to hide behind. When I first arrived here for the summer, he was surprised I read so much. Over the years, my Moore had no doubt mailed him my report cards. Still Whitney Swinn on the cover, he asks dolefully. Yup. Whitney Swinn is famous in Duxton. Somebody snatched her from her parents' house, and there's been no trace of her since. Every day the Duxton Clipper flashes the same photograph of her. She's wearing the kind of clothes Mr. Agrawal would love. Anklets, glossy Mary Jane shoes, a white eyelet dress, doll's clothes. Seeing Whitney's image so often, she's imprinted on my brain. She's pixie small with corn silk hair, butterfly barrettes, and braces. Her large eyes are muddy green, like two lily pads on a pond. I see eyes like that, and I know she's been floating through life. What's it been now? 3 weeks? Mr. Agrawal asks. 20 days, sir, I tell him, and I'm certain. Like I said, she's been imprinted. You think they would have found her. By this tone, I know he means crumpled in a ditch. He isn't trying to be pessimistic or cruel, it's just that the odds are stacked against girls like Whitney. Every year it seems another few disappear. Parents plead on TV, well-doers wave signs, newscasters salivate, but the end almost always reads like an old Russian novel. Stuff like this doesn't happen in Duxton, and the whole town's gone haywire. The hardware store has a waiting list for locks and chains, and then there are the people buying surveillance cameras and handguns. I've been affected too. I worry when I see little kids playing outside. I wonder if they'll edge too close to the street, if they'll pause when a car sidles up, engine softly thrumming. You remember where she lived? Mr. Agrawal asks. He's trying to catch my eye. Over on that tract near Grove Street, the one with the huge houses. Like mansions. Yup. Mr. Argo wouldn't admit it, but it's obvious to me he doesn't care much for little girls. My grandmother told me that when my Moore was born, he'd ask a nurse to double check under the swaddle. My Moore was his only child, too. There were complications, as they say, something twisted, clotted, and terribly wrong. I told you more I'd find you a job, Mr. Argowell says, suddenly. Isn't studying all summer enough? That's nothing, he huffs, and I wait for the inevitable when I was young speech, but instead he murmurs, too much time on your hands and your mind will start to stray. The soleil's disappearing now. It dips into the thick creepers that hem Mr. Agrawal's property. The night creatures are starting to make noise. I could work at that garage off Howe Street. I met the owner, Eddie. He's cool. A girl changing tires all day? Yeah, so? He snorts for effect. No way, Jose. I promised you more you'd come back straightened. I'm straightened. You're about as straight as this, he says, pointing to his nose, which is lopsided and bulbous. He likes to tell the story of how he broke it when he was 15, how he'd gone head to head with an armed robber when the family used to live in Queens. You got another option, I ask him. Yes, hot shot. You're going to fill that old well in the back. I've ordered the clay. Why don't you just nail the plywood you've got over it? That's a job half done. Mom wants me to get a job to make money. I point out, my shoulders tensing. She wants you to show you're not a deadbeat like your far. Mr. Argwell knows exactly how to push my buttons. He's the only relative I've got who'll openly badmouth my dad. He's always harbored the suspicion that my father married my mother to stay in this country, but that doesn't make sense. After the divorce, my father packed his bags and hightailed it back home, and besides, my Moore is not exactly the baseball and apple pie type. My dad's Russian, but not just any Russian. He's a Russian from Odessa. If you don't know the difference, he'll be happy to tell you. You'll need a comfortable chair, a few bottles of wine, and most of a night. Then you'll know why Odessa is to Ukraine like New York City is to the U.S. You start mañana, Mr. Argyle informs me. He stretches his bare feet. They're skinny with dry, cracked heels and long, sallow nails that curve at the ends, a raptor's feet. How deep is it? Deep. 30 feet? 40? He waves me off and stares ahead as fireflies blink to life. I have to know for logistical purposes. I don't know. It's probably not up to code. Wait, you never told the town about it? You should. You sound like a bureaucrat, Jayashree. You would do well in India. I want to remind him that he's lived here longer than he ever lived in Lucknow, but he's distracted by the brief snips of light, and anyway, I know better. Abruptly, he announces he's going for a drive. He likes the evening hunt, raccoons and possums, mostly. That's part of why he moved here, so remote a place. I can understand what he enjoys about killing harmless little animals, about ripping fur off skin that was never meant to be seen. His whole basement is draped with pelts, and still he keeps a rifle in the trunk. He used to have a dog named Burger King, a shag carpet of a mutt with a dirty-looking muzzle and cute, clownishly large paws. Mr. Ogwell cherished that dog. My Moore said he fed it to death, maybe with all the bacon strips and soup bones he bought for it. I asked Mr. Ogwell once, how could he have loved Burger King so much but feel nothing for the animals he hunted? They no doubt felt the pain as much as Burger King must have felt when he died. A growth in his stomach, a tumor, something random and unfair. There's a difference, Mr. Argwell had said. No, I replied. A flare of anger suddenly ignited. There is. You've got to learn who's in your pack and who's not. Even now I think back on that answer, how inexplicably it makes sense. I watch him hobble away, a thinly muscled silhouette. his skin so dark it melts into the air. A minute later his battered Buick LeSabre crunches the winding gravel road. Loneliness and a bit of fright come as soon as Mr. Agrawal goes. The noises seem to intensify. Bullfrogs croaking, crickets chirping, twigs cracking under invisible paws. I realize not for the first time that Mr. Agrawal lives along the borderland of the wild. His nearest neighbor is a half a mile away. Coyotes and foxes have been known to scurry across his yard, a jungle of unmowed grass, dandelions, ragweed, and goldenrod. Somewhere beyond in the overgrowth, a well needs filling. Before darkness falls for true, I will myself take a look. I have to claw my way through. The creepers are thorny, unforgiving. They give way just before the well as if in fear of it, or reverence. In that dim clearing I catch my breath and feel the itchy raised scratches along my arms. The well is marked by a waist-high circle of joined stones. For as long as I can remember there's been the same sheet of weathered plywood over the hole, and on top of that a pile of loose bricks. Reluctantly, I decide that Mr. Agrawal is right. Boarding it up wouldn't be enough. Years from now the wood would rot, give way. A shiver jerks my spine when I consider the possibilities. Wells and silos have always spooked me. As a kid I used to have nightmares about falling down one of those man-made throats, flailing haplessly in grain or water, scraping the sleek cylindrical walls until my strength gives and my mouth fills. I pick off the bricks one by one and push the plywood aside. Then I bend over the hole and shout, Mater chod, ben chod, otsosi, otsosie. I wonder if somewhere way off in the woods Mr. Agrawal can hear me. I don't curse much now that I'm in the middle of nowhere, but old habits die hard. The words strike bottom way down deep in Hades and echo back. I peer into the gloom, taking a long, slow breath. I expect to inhale something rancid, but all I taste is stale water. 5 years ago my dad left me and my mom. It was a hot summer like this one. I remember that the heat added to our torment. When Mr. Agrawal found out, he convinced the two of us to pack up our apartment in the city and stay with him in Duxton. Just temporarily, he'd say, until my Moore was through the crying and back on her feet. Back then, Mr. Agrawal wasn't determined to find me work, but my Moore was. She wanted me out of her hair, and she got her way over the A&P. A chatty checkout girl remarked that she'd been leaving for college in the fall and that on Saturday nights she sometimes babysat. I just can't do it any further, she said, stretching pink gum across her pinker tongue. I need my weekends free so I can let loose a little. You know what I mean? I ducked behind my Moore's voluminous salwar, watching this girl with permed, fawn-colored hair and tight Jordache jeans sort groceries into bags. At the time, she'd seemed beautiful. Yes, I know what you mean, my Moore responded. What's your name? I've seen you around. Anita Obolensk Agrawal. You're Indian, right? The girl, whose name tag read Amy, nodded approvingly. I recognized her reaction. It was the one most people have upon meeting my Moore, if they haven't been disillusioned by Indian cab drivers or gas station owners. It was the one associated with doctors, scientists, and in crisp white lab coats and children who won national spelling bees. It was the one that conjured phrases like model minority, brain drain, and forehead dot, and images like that from a recent Time magazine cover article, those Asian American whiz kids. Amy glanced at me. Is that your daughter? My Moore nodded. How old is she? She's 13. So she's old enough to sit. Do you think she could handle a 6-year-old? My Moore looked me over as if I were stuck with pins on a corkboard. I think so. She's become further mature this year. Let me ask the parents, Kay? Give me your number and I'll let you know. I would truly appreciate that, Amy. She could use some responsibility. My Moore bowed slightly, as was her habit. That bow, now that I look back, seemed like an apology. Not long after, I met the little girl's parents at their front door. They showed me around their gleaming 3-story house, encouraged me to raid the fridge, and outlined Amy's old routine. They told me which rooms were off limits. I wondered if they would have imposed such boundaries if I'd looked different. Maybe if I had the Moore's frizzled blonde hair or electric blue headband. But to be fair, I'd be assessing them too, though my head was bent, though I observed everything out of the corner of my eye. I watched the way the Far doted on Whitney, plucking a plastic bangle bracelet from his sports coat before leaving. He slipped it on her wrist and called her Jelly Bean, and she beamed at him with big gorgeous eyes. Under Whitney's spell, he followed in the fog of his wife's acrid, woozy perfume. It had taken me a long time to figure out what the smell had reminded me of. Marigolds. With her parents gone, Whitney dragged out the Barbies. I'd always shunned dolls, Barbies above all others. She came out of her room with a tub of them and dumped the whole blonde sorority onto the living room carpet. Strangely, every doll was damaged. Whitney or one of her friends had scratched out eyes, amputated limbs, and cropped hair into crew cuts and asymmetric bobs. Whitney gave me the lone black Barbie, and the first thing I thought was not that this doll was the least cherished and most abused, which it was, but that it was entirely out of place in the Swin household. Some out-of-touch relative must have picked it up as a last-minute birthday present. I hadn't had many toys growing up, and those that I did have were generally hand-me-downs, cheap stuffed animals and the like. I had no idea how to play Barbies, as Whitney put it, but I soon learned her method involved taking off their clothes and rubbing their robotic bodies against each other. Ooh, ah, Whitney moaned graphically, and the way she did it, I knew she was trying to get a rise out of me. She was testing me. Further than that, she was testing the night's potential. Are you Puerto Rican? She wanted to know, moving her doll on top of mine. Why do you ask? My Moor says Puerto Rican smell. I'm not Puerto Rican. But you're dirty like one. What? You're dirty like one, she repeated. Is your daddy Puerto Rican? I moved my doll to the dominant position. He's Russian. Whitney looked at me quizzically. Russian? From Russia? I clarified. You know, one of those places that's not America? He lives there? Let's do something else, I said hastily, throwing the Barbies back into the tub, all of them except for the black one. That one I placed back gently. The whole time I wondered what she'd been getting at, that my skin was darker than hers, that I had a few pimples. I wondered if she'd forgotten to put on deodorant. Do you want a snack, something to drink? I asked her, to distract myself. Uh-huh, Coca-Cola. Well, I don't know about that. The kid was already hyper. She ogled me, all lashes and cloying sweetness. Then she traipsed into the kitchen, where she filled a bowl with a combination of Lucky Charms and Count Chocula. I let her, too, until she insisted on pouring the milk herself. Predictably, it sloshed over the bowl, cascading over the counter like a white waterfall. Hey, give me that, I snapped, grabbing for the carton. Whitney screeched gleefully as she stomped the puddle on the floor. Stop that, I cried, on my hands and knees with a roll of paper towels, thinking that my Moor would soon put up with some variation of this exact same scenario. She decided that once we moved back to the city, she'd become a maid in a hotel or office complex. She'd been one when she was younger, before she met my far. She said she used to stain perfumes. She was used to stain perfumes and rug burn knees. Whitney giggled hysterically and bolted away, leaving creamy footprints in her wake. After cleaning the mess, I was determined to establish control. I resolved to give the little demon a bath. I ordered her to undress, then rinsed off her sneakers and shoved her damp clothes into the hamper. I made sure the water was warm and plucked in all her bath toys to give her something to do. Surprisingly, she climbed in of her own accord. How long do I have to stay here? For as long as I tell you to. At first I monitored her carefully. She sang some tune from Annie. It's the hard knocks life for us, and a bunch of other lyrics that in no way applied to her situation. I looked through the medicine cabinet, noting condoms, KY jelly, hair peroxide, Valium laxatives, razor blades. I examined the fancy star-shaped clasp of the window lock sitting atop the toilet cover. I whizzed through a basket of fashion magazines and diet books. For all that time, Whitney busily amused herself, and I decided it was safe to leave for a minute, 5 minutes tops. I chose her parents' bedroom, one of the off-limit places. Carefully, with only the tips of my fingers, I opened a dresser drawer and felt the cool, slippery fabric of Mrs. Swin's panties and slips. In the closet, I unearthed a box at the back. It was full of Playboys. The women inside all looked like Christie Brinkley, if Christie Brinkley were to have helium in her boobs. I put back the magazines in the same order I'd taken them out, pushed the box into place, and slid the bypassing door to its original position, roughly 4 inches from the jamb. I was about to move on to another room when I noticed the bed, how it was different somehow, further swollen and roly-poly than a normal bed. A black satin spread kept it shrouded like something under a magician's cloth. I touched the spread and it reacted, sending shiny ripples down the sleek fabric. I'd never seen a waterbed before, and it seemed terribly exotic, too enticing to pass up. I sat on it gingerly at first, but gaining confidence, I lay down and stretched out, twisting, squirming, and bobbing atop the wavy surface. I felt like a manatee. I'd seen one at the Mystic Aquarium in Connecticut. The constant undulation reminded me of the time I'd been invited to a pool party, how the chlorine water had braced my back whilst also observing the motion of the other girls. I was still thinking back to the pool having the time of my life when Whitney walked in sopping naked. She gazed at me reproachfully, and for a second I forgot she was only 6. Then I got up, smoothed the bedspread, and made sure I hadn't left any stray hairs. Dragging her back to the bathroom, I cleared the toys she'd strewn over the flooded tile floor. It was only while it was only whilst I was toweling her off that I noticed how the toilet cover was up. The water was bubbling and foaming over the seat. Above the sink, the porcelain soap holder stood empty. I wanted to slap her. I truly did, but I clenched her wrist instead to keep her from running. She showed no fear, not even a trace, and why should she? By then the truth was painfully clear to both of us. I was neither a worthy accomplice nor a worthy foe. To retrieve the bar of soap, I'd need time, and to buy time, I'd need to send her to bed early. I was considering this when I spotted it, a large mole poking out from beneath one of Whitney's shoulder blades. It was fat, misshapen, and startlingly distinct on her vanilla skin. It reminded me of a raisinette when two of the raisins get stuck together under the chocolate. Whitney couldn't follow my gaze. Her neck couldn't crane that distant, but she knew what I was looking at. "I've tried to wash it off," she explained sheepishly. She sounded so embarrassed. I was momentarily overcome. I thought maybe I'd been misjudging her all this time. She was only a kid, for God's sake. And what the hell do kids know? "No, honey, you can't. It's a beauty mark. It doesn't come off." Why is it called a beauty mark when it's so ugly? It's the color of poop. It's not ugly. I can hide it. You don't have to hide it. Lots of people have them. You can't see it under a bathing suit, she insisted, her voice increasingly desperate. "It's okay to see it. It's normal, natural. Nothing to be ashamed of." I was trying to maintain my composure to sound like I knew a thing or two, but my face was going red under her challenging stare. I was still drying her, and her face was close to mine. Her tiny, hairless body smelled like baby oil, springtime, bounced fabric softener. Her lips reminded me of the buds on the miniature over-pruned rose bushes that glutted this neighborhood. Her hair, even wet, shone golden, and I couldn't help it. I felt defective beside her, like I was this grimy, greasy giant foreigner next to an ivory snow princess. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I continued, struggling to keep my voice even. "That there's nothing wrong with you?" "Do you have a beauty mark?" Sure I do," I lied. "Tons of them." Teasingly, maybe provokingly, she cocked her head to one side. "So that's why your daddy left you?" I'm going to pause there just for the sake of recording because we're getting storage warning. So I'm going to stop and start again.